Hi, my name is Dave Barnard, and I'm a retired Air Force officer, and I was asked to be part of a project about Yarmouth or area residents who are veterans. And I'm happy to be here. This is my first lights on interview, so I'm going to stumble along, but I hope it's informative. So I began my service from a service family. My father was a officer in the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps in World War II, and he returned from 3 years in England, and I was 3 years old, and I asked my mom, who was this man? And it was quite an impression on me because he was briefing RAF and U.S. Air Force pilots on escape and evasion, and had some pretty impressive successes with people returning to the UK safely. In any event, I went off to college in 1965, and they had an ROTC program, and I was stupid enough not to join it. So when I graduated in 1965, Vietnam was rolling along. I was about ready to be drafted, and I remembered my father's pride and some of the stories in the Air Force, and I said, well, the Air Force is for me. At that time, they wouldn't take me as a pilot or as a navigator because of my glasses. And I joined the Air Force, went to Lackland Air Force Base in Texas for basic training. Came out with one stripe, Airman First Class, and was assigned to Westover Air Force Base in Chicopee, Mass. And that was a SAC base. And I went there as a personnel officer, and I was wrote history of the wing, and also just helped out in administrative activities. About 6 months into the assignment, Vietnam was getting more activity, and officers' ROTC slots, or rather OTS slots, opened up. And I had a good friend, he was a second lieutenant, who sponsored me, so I was sent back to Lackland to become a 90-day wonder. And sure enough, I came out 90 days, having given up a one-stripe Airman First Class position to a second lieutenant, gold bars, and people were saluting me. I couldn't believe it. I was sent back to Westover, actually, and I joined a B-52 wing, and I was assigned to the Recce Tech unit. And I needed TS clearance, so it took a while for that to come through, so I did normal administrative things. And the clearance came through, and I was sent to Guam with the B-52 wing. They were on 90-day or 180-day rotations, and went off to Vietnam via Guam. And I remember very vividly traveling on a KC-135 tanker airplane, and hammock seats, and landing in Agana or Anderson Air Force Base, and it was 88 degrees, and it was 97% humidity, and I had a starched Air Force summer uniform on that quickly became soaked. So that was my introduction to the war zone and an island in the middle of the Pacific that had B-52s, and they were running bombing missions to Vietnam in that area. And I worked the 12 to 8 shift, and I was scoring B-52 photography of actual bombing runs and preparing briefings for the commander every morning. I walked to and from my BOQ, and the BOQ was a new adventure in that the walls were 3 feet thick, or 36 inches, 36 inches thick, because they were supposedly typhoon-proof. No air conditioning, so the shoes got moldy very quickly, and your starched tan uniform became unbearable in the heat and the humidity. But I enjoyed it, and I worked hard, and I could listen to Red Sox games about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was kind of fun. I left that, and I came back to Westover and joined the Recce Tech, and about 3 months later, the Pueblo incident happened off the North Korean coast. And within 48 hours, I was on a 707 plane heading with 120 other intelligence officers to the West Coast and on to Okinawa, and landing in Japan, and then landing in Korea. And we were part of the support group after the Pueblo hijacking. That was my first time in a foreign country, and my job was to go through intelligence reports in the evening, and I worked the 12 to 8 shift in the morning, and I had a gun, the door was locked, and the only thing we really worried about was if the kerosene heaters caught fire, there was no escape, actually. Anyway, it was a highly classified area, and we talked to commanders in the Pacific and the White House every single night with activity. At that time, North Korea had sent a bunch of their soldiers, and they dug a tunnel underneath the border in North and South Korea, and they actually went and attacked the Blue House, which was their equivalent of the White House. It was extremely tense. One of the reasons that the U.S. didn't respond in the hijacking of the boat was the airplanes were nuclear equipped, and they didn't have fittings. It was to put on conventional weapons. But this is my first experience being on an air base with armed U.S. aircraft at the ready. And we were flying, the air crews were flying intelligence missions every single day. And it was a pretty interesting job. I was scheduled to be there for 3 months, and they asked me to stay on for 6 months. And then it became, do you want to go home and go to Vietnam? And I wasn't against going to Vietnam, but they said, if you can stay here another 7 months or 5 months, make it an 11-month tour, we'll send you home, and you have a PCS assignment in the U.S., and I picked the latter. My experience in Korea, I think, was really valuable because it was a different culture, and it was an exciting place to be. The Koreans had terrific military, and they were also terrifically industrial and working really hard. They built a highway between the capital to Busan at the south of the country 18 months ahead of schedule. That's the kind of work ethic they had. Anyway, it was a very interesting experience. It was an experience because it was a country on the move economically, and they were hardworking, and it really was an eye-opener for a Western guy to be dropped into that environment. I was happy to be there from that standpoint. My final assignment was the Air Force Survival School in Spokane, Washington. I went through the normal 2-week training, and these were we trained pilots to escape and evade and stay alive if they have to land on the ground. And then I was appointed to a special course, and I taught there for 15 months. And we were directly involved with communication with U.S. Air Force or U.S. military pilots who'd been prisoners in the North Vietnam. And a few of them had been released, and they had all been interviewed by our group out there. That was a terrific assignment. Washington is a beautiful state. On the west end, it's wet and rainy, and on where we were on the eastern Washington, it was just like New England. You had snow and you had 4 seasons, and it was a great place to be. I separated from the Air Force, not really knowing what I was going to do, returned to Connecticut, which is my home state, and got a job as a civilian in manufacturing and a support role in manufacturing. In 1972, I joined the reserves, and I went back to Westover and was in the personnel office and had specific responsibility for getting the people involved in a mobility exercise if they had to go to Korea or if they had to go to some other place in Europe. Processed and ready and on the right airplane in the right time, and it was fast. So I worked in that, and then I had other assignments within the personnel office. But working in that MAC outfit, which is military airlift, it was interesting to see how the real reality was of how do you get people and equipment where they needed to go quickly and the right stuff going to the right place. I left the Air Force active duty in 1988. I'd been promoted to lieutenant colonel, and they didn't have a slot for me. So I volunteered to be an ROTC and Air Force Academy liaison admissions officer. We lived in Norwich, Vermont, which is right next to White River and Dartmouth College. And so I had 5 high schools in both states that I had to go and talk to students and counselors about the Air Force Academy and ROTC at any university. I really enjoyed that job because in many of these high schools, they were rural and there was not a lot of exposure to ROTC opportunities, and certainly the Air Force Academy. I remember one young gentleman I interviewed about admissions to the Air Force Academy, and he actually had a house in a rural area with no electricity, and he would study and he would go to his town library to study, and he was a pretty good student. But he needed to have some extra help, and the Air Force has a prep school that they send potential candidates to for the Air Force Academy, and I recommended him for that. He was a terrific young man. I don't know what happened to him. I stayed in that job for a couple of years, and then that job ended. So I had a total of about 23 years of involvement with the Air Force, and my closest friends were military people. I had a couple of health issues early in my, middle in my life, and the first people I called were my Air Force buddies. And I think that's the most important thing is what you see in other people under stress, and you see normal Americans, all sizes, all shapes, all colors, all backgrounds. It doesn't make any difference. When they're put together as a group to protect our country, there are no barriers. And some of my closest friends were the middle rank sergeants who were actually doing the work. And that, I was very proud of that, that you see these people come together and they leave all sorts of issues behind them, and they're thinking about the country and their families and the job that they have to do, and it's pretty impactful. Now when I see someone with a Navy hat or a Marine hat or any kind of shirt with it, I ask them if they're veterans, and I be sure to thank them. And some of it's quite emotional. 3 or 4 of my roommates, when we were in reserves, we had a suite at Westover, and we had 4 officers in a suite. All 3 of the 4 of them have died. And I regret that I wasn't able to spend more time and stay connected with them, because they're not there anymore, and yet they were terribly important for me when I was going through a couple of health crises. My first year of post-military, I was kind of lost, and it wasn't due to any kind of war scare or any kind of PTSD or anything like that. I was just kind of a little bit of a fish out of water, and it took me a while to land on my feet and get into a manufacturing job situation and get going in my career. So even for people who come back and don't appear to have any serious medical issues or physical physique issues or body issues, it is a big transition. And I would just encourage people to step back and listen and try to be supportive if they think the transition is a rough road. Anyway, I had lived in Connecticut. I grew up in Westchester County, New York, outside New York City, and my father moved to New Haven, Connecticut for a job, and I grew up on the Connecticut shore, and that's why I returned back there. And connection to Maine, 2 weeks in the summer we'd come up to Yarmouth because my grandparents had a small summer cottage here in Yarmouth, and that was a real privilege. When my father was serving in England, my mother would come up with 2 babies and stay for a little bit during the summers. And that's how it got connected. When we drive up in a car, we'd cross the bridge down in York, and we'd start looking for the house. That's anyway. But it was a lovely time, and I eventually ended coming up back to Yarmouth. And my wife and I came to Maine because she had a job offer at Maine Medical, and she had been working at Dartmouth, and they wanted to have a similar program, and they hired her to come and start a program. So we moved out here in 2002, and we've been here ever since. And it's been a rewarding experience. Our roommates, you know, everybody had a different family. So when you were with someone for 48 hours, a weekend tour or a 2-week summer tour, you get to know them pretty well. And I was just amazed at how they were able to carry on and I had a full-time civilian job, and transition. And there was one of my roommates worked at Wellesley College, a very dear friend, and he would go home some nights at about 8 o'clock at night, do some work, and come back by 7 o'clock in the morning. And that was an hour-and-a-half drive from Chicopee, Mass. To Boston. And but they were solid people, and they were thoughtful people, and it was a privilege to be around them. Later in life, I had some real challenges and medical challenges, and they were really supportive, and I appreciate it. And when there's a veteran, there's a military bond. I don't care what surface it is, that the civilian population, unless you've been a part of it, really don't understand. And when you say, would you give your life for somebody, you get a bond with these people. It has nothing to do with rank. It has nothing to do with position. That this is shoulder-to-shoulder stuff. And yeah, you would give your life. And you'd give your life for your country because you believe in what is going on here, and people trying to be active in their government and their town affairs, and play a role and have some leadership capability. That really sticks with me a lot. I get kind of emotional about it, actually. I got into manufacturing. I needed to start somewhere. I didn't want to go to an MBA program right away. So I worked in manufacturing in a Connecticut business there, and then I did go to an MBA program at night. I had an opportunity to do that, and I did get some GI Bill help financially there, and that was important. And then at one point, it was time for me to leave that company, and I wanted to be involved in some operation which I dealt with people more directly in their lives. And I got involved when I came to Vermont. I moved to Vermont and got married, and I worked in residential real estate for a while. And I liked the idea that you were working directly with people and helping them solve problems. And my goal was to provide them with the right information so they can make a decision good for themselves. And I had a good career in that for 15 years. And then when we moved to Maine, I helped my wife. I volunteered at Maine Medical, helping her set up her program for a year. And then I got a job in Portland helping a small real estate company get started on the ground. And eventually I retired from that when my wife retired. And so I think the people-to-people issue for me was really important. In corporation, I had to be careful of protocols and, who do you copy here and who do you copy there and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed when someone came and had an issue with needing to make a move, either buying something in our area or moving out of the area. I went at it with intensity and had a good experience helping them solve family problems in getting what was good for them in real estate. It was a privilege to work with them, and I'm glad I did it. I think jumping into the military from a civilian side, all of a sudden you realize, there are rules and there are guidelines and there are protocols And sometimes you have to step back and say, well, wait a minute, why do they do it this way, and all of that. And what you realize is over time they've realized what is the best way to get the job done, and in a very difficult environment. And so that's an adjustment, and and being a young college grad, and or a young person, sometimes that's hard to wrap your arms around. You need to kind of step back, and as you age, you're able to do that. You can step back and I don't mean diplomatically isn't the right word, I don't think, but I think being more polished. And my family always encouraged us, I had two sisters, one older, one younger, to do your best. And I never knew what that meant, because there were no scales, there were no A's and B's, or there was no successes here, et cetera, that I felt like that. But later in life, as you go through life, you realize that your interaction with people and those around you is really important. And now, my wife and I are both 80 plus, and in the last 10K of your marathon, so to speak, I'm a runner, and you talk in marathon terms, what's really important is going to bed at night saying, did I do my best, and did I help someone today? And that is really a plus when you know you've helped somebody, or even saying hi to someone, or good morning, or have a nice day, puts a really nice flavor on things. And I think I get that. And when I think of military people and other people serving groups, serving their towns, serving the states, and that kind of thing, I think it makes a big difference when you start off with a greeting, and it sets a tone. And life is short, and you want to do the best you can to make it a better place. Volunteering, I'm a big person on volunteering. One of the things I had most pleasure doing was helping the local Yarmouth rowing club get started back in '08 or something like that, and I volunteered for that, and I wanted to make sure the kids were safe on the water, as safe as you could be in April when the water's 42 degrees. And I really was, I don't want to say I was a dictator, but I knew what I was talking about, and I wanted them to be safe, and they were. And I was really proud, and the program grew tremendously, and a lot of kids got an experience that, and this is all volunteers. These are moms and dads supporting this program, and college rowers who came out of the woodwork and said, let's help, we'll coach for nothing. And Amy Smith was the leader of that group locally, and she's a marvelous lady, and she's a great example of just all out working for good. And I was pleased to be a part of that, and I'm happy that I had that experience. Military people is different, and you don't lose that. That's all I can say. I got a little weepy there talking about military, but I also want to talk about someone else in our town. I'm not going to give a name, but as an example of core military and giving. This person's married, has a wife and two small kids in this village, and he's also a Navy reservist, served active duty time and serves in the Navy. And he's figured out with his family how to go on 2 foreign tours as a reservist for considerable time, be away from his family, and his family was able to work well and get help from neighbors and friends, and he served with honor and came home. He's now retired, And that's the kind of person that you sometimes don't realize what's going on in your neighborhood or in your town. And there are a lot of other people doing the same kind of thing. And that's just the kind of person a lot of these people are. So anyway, I'm proud to know them. So anyway, I've been asked on a couple of occasions to join this and join that, and I've been supportive. I walked in one parade. I know that doesn't sound like much, but I'm a big supporter of these groups, but I just have other things that I have to take care of first, and so I just haven't had an opportunity to do much of that. I have a pretty blank page in terms of memberships and that kind of thing. But I make it a point, if I see someone with some military gear, and that includes U.S. Coast Guard. I was a Coast Guard auxiliarist here in South Portland for a number of years until I couldn't do it for family health reasons. And I guess the only way to respond to that accurately is to say I make a very special effort to reach out when I see someone at Hannaford's or in a parking lot or when it's appropriate. Clam Festival was a good example. To ask them about their hat or their shirt or and usually the answer is something about the military, and that ends up in a 5 or 10 minute conversation with a total stranger, don't know the name, and I just want to thank them for their service. And so I'm not a very good representative of joined groups, but I certainly, it's right at the top of my list every day when I think about people who are serving and who have served and died, certainly. It's right up there. My wife is immune compromised, so I have to be extra careful in some situations, and I wanted to be a driver for cancer patients. I had a lot of radiation in one incident, and but I can't do that. I'm uncomfortable doing that because of immunity issues. So there's some other little barriers like that that I have to be cognizant of and careful about. After college, and I was in the service at Westover Field, I had breakfast with a college classmate who was from Lexington, and he was going to graduate school, and he had met somebody in the Northfield, Mount Hermon, Northfield, Mass area, and he said, "Gee, I've met this gal, she's really nice, you might want to give her a call." I was single at the time, and I did. And I called, and she said yes, and we went out on a date, and that started a relationship. And that was while I was at Westover, and then I went to Guam, and then I went to Korea, and I came back and finished out. And she was teaching French and English in Switzerland for a couple of years. But and we split because at one point she wanted to get married, and I wasn't ready to get married. This is while I was at the survival school. So we split for 11 years, and then we got reconnected very unusually, and eventually got engaged and got married, and we're in Vermont. And she was working at the Dartmouth Hospital in the psychiatry department, and started a program for the whole hospital for the elderly. And then at a Maine marathon, we were supporting some friends here in Portland, and we met a doctor who had been at Dartmouth, and he said, "Well, at Maine Med, they're starting a similar program. Why don't you come out here and help them?" So she sent an email out, got the director of the department, and he offered her an interview, they said, and when the program was approved, they hired her, and that was in May of 2002, and that began our relationship with Yarmouth and Portland and Maine Med. And It was a great program for the elderly because they were working on ways to keep the elderly, particularly the 70 and over elderly, emotionally and active, so that when they went home, they hadn't lost any ground by being in the hospital. They called it the Hospital Elder Life Program, and it's still going today. And they actually proved that they could save the country money through insurances, et cetera, if they could get someone, keep someone active and not decline mentally while they're getting patched up at the hospital, that their chances of falling on their kitchen floor or doing something like that when they got home were greatly reduced. So anyway, she was part of that program, developing that program, and I helped her for a year doing that, and that was my introduction to Portland and Maine Med, and we rented in Yarmouth at the time, and here we are, and the program's still going. I'm happy to have been involved. We got back together, and after dating for a while from Utica, New York, where I was working, to Norwich, Vermont, she said, "Hey, I've had enough of this stuff. Time to get going." And so we talked, and we got engaged and got married, and part of that is I had a 90-year-old aunt living in Hanover, and we were talking, and she said, "You need to go to church and meet somebody." Well, I knew Cynthia, and she does go to church. And then she said, "You need to find someone that you want to be the mother of your kids." And I've never forgotten that. And secondly, you want to find someone that you don't see your life without. So there were two things. So I was at after New Year's Eve party with my best friend in Squam Lake, and we were talking about that, and they said, "Well, why don't you just call Cynthia up and see what's happening?" So I went home, got on the phone, called her mother, and said, is it okay, appropriate for me to try to get in touch with Cynthia? Could you give me her address? And her mom said, "No, I'll give you her phone number. It is totally appropriate." So I called her up, and I had guess who, and 2 weeks later I drove to Norwich, Vermont, and that began a monthly commute, and the end was marrying. And a good marriage, your partner makes you a better person, and boy, that is certainly the case. And serving in the military makes you a better person. You just have to think about other things, and you meet people that are way off the charts. But boy, when you're in a foxhole, or when you're in a bomb shelter, or when you're in a Quonset hut, you want them by you, and they want you by them, and that's the bottom line. Of course, the world now is in such a different place. I mean, you have things going on in Europe, and you have things going on in the Middle East, and the world's a mess. And we certainly do need a capable military to take care of our own interests and to help people who need help. Most people think of going in the military as foxholes and, getting shot up and stuff like that. There are an awful lot of jobs in the military that don't put you at the front line. And that goes for volunteer jobs too. But I think getting away from home, being around very different people with different experiences, having to take orders, having to perform at a certain level, that is one heck of a preparation for the next step in your life, whatever that may be. Whether it's going to college, or whether it's going to trade school, or getting a job that starting off on some kind of career. The fact that you are away from home, making some decisions within some guidelines, expected to be part of a team, expected to do it right and do it fast, because there's a whole lot more than you. I think that's a terribly valuable experience, and whether it's military or otherwise, I would recommend it to anybody. You grow up an awful lot. You learn how to pay bills. You learn how to say thank you. You learn how to write a letter. You learn how to ask for something or take care of yourself medically. And to me, it was valuable, really valuable, and I'm glad I did it. My father served, and he was away from home for 3.5 years. I'd never seen him, and I was 3 years old. And so I had that kind of background, actually. So whether it's the military or I would not, like people talk about a gap year for children getting out of high school and not quite being oriented yet or having a direction. But there's all sorts of ways to serve the country, serve your town, and those kinds of things, like the military. But the military is there certainly going out and doing something, and frankly, having a lot of growing up in a period. And boy, you certainly get that. I went to Korea, and man, I saw things I would never believe, a whole different culture. And but boy, would I want them on my side if we ever got into a scrape, you know. So that's how I feel about it. So I feel pretty emotional about it. I don't know that I have anything to brag about other than I did my job to the best of my ability. I served my country, and I hope other young people will do the same, whether it be in a civilian capacity or in a military capacity. It doesn't make any difference. If they get outside of their normal village or their normal town or their normal environment, circle, it's a tremendously rewarding experience, and I'm happy to have done it. And if we had another crisis where an 82-year-old, not mentally dead yet, a veteran needed to serve, I'd be happy to serve. So I hope that's informative, and I welcome the opportunity to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.